Okay, I think we can get started. Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining our webinar today. The topic of our discussion today is Advanced Software Design Methodologies and Functional Safety, brought to you by ARM and SIEMENS. Our objective today is to introduce you to a methodology called Shift Left and Trace using virtual processor models and safety qualified tools. We hope that this will help you to reduce risk and functional safety compliance through the software development lifecycle and accelerate time by testing software before hardware in DevOps and continuous integration environments. Our presenters today are Christopher Seidel from ARM, Zdeněk Fielder from SIEMENS, and Stuart Turner from Electrosource. Christopher is a product manager with ARM who's been in the industry for over 20 years with ASIC design and ARM core experience. He joined ARM in 2013, and he's responsible for the Kyle MDK products along with software development products at ARM. Zdeněk is a senior product manager at SIEMENS. He's responsible for Polarion application life management, and he has over 15 years experience in product lifecycle management. Stuart is a field applications engineer supporting SIEMENS Polarion and ARM tools at Electrosource. Electrosource is a representative and distributor for ARM and SIEMENS tools in Canada, along with the US. My name is Peter Anselmo. I'm the Director of Business Development at Electrosource. I have just over 20 years experience supporting customers with semiconductors and software in the electronic space. Our agenda today, Christopher will talk about functional safety and software development, virtual prototypes, and functional accurate models, what they are and why they could benefit you. DevOps and continuous integration and continuous development with ARM. He'll give you a high-level view of unit testing, functional testing in the software development lifecycle. Zdeněk from SIEMENS will talk about the challenges in modern functional safety development, the evolution of the Agile V, and the Agile lifecycle. And then integrated model-based system engineering, how you can manage and trace the software development lifecycle with digital threads. And finally, Electrosource's Stuart Turner will provide a demonstration validating the example of these tools by running a unit test on an ARM fast model, injecting a fault, and storing the results in SIEMENS Polarion. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat window. We'll address them at the end of the seminar for quality and audio purposes. And copies of the presentations will be emailed out to registrants within 3 to 5 business days. So before we hand over to Christopher, why shift left and trace? The problem is that functional safety is not trivial. It's hard. Complexity is increasing in modern FUSA systems. And an example of this is vehicles, modern day vehicles have 100 million lines plus of code. That'll be increasing by 2 to 4x in the next 3 years. And if the information is not properly documented, both in code and assets, compliance audits can delay time to market. Continuous integration and DevOps unit tests, functional tests typically have to wait for hardware, but electronic lead times are extended, in some cases 6 months to 52 weeks for MCUs. And finally, bugs in the field are exponentially more expensive and costly to find them versus in the lab. So with this methodology, we hope to reduce risk, save time, and ultimately help you to reduce your cost. Christopher, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Second. Okay, I hope you can see my screen. All right.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, welcome to this webinar about advanced software development methodologies in functional safety. Embedded products are getting more complex, both from hardware and the software standpoint. There are more lines of code, as Peter has said, than ever on all embedded applications. For example, in automotive, the number of lines of code in a luxury car is projected to triple with level 3 ADAS. More lines of code mean more bugs, more maintenance. The cost and complexity of coding, integrating, testing, all these tens or even hundreds of millions of lines is something that impacts all the industry. On the other hand, there has been never so much pressure for products to go to market faster. Software development cycle time has to reduce despite the new complexities. Better time to market means better time to revenue, better chance for increased market share. For a typical product lifecycle, losses mount through the product development period. Once development is complete, sales ramp up quickly but decay away as competitors enter the market and new products or technologies appear. Increasing the development period has a double impact. It increases the development costs, but it also delays the time to market, missing the fast ramp in sales. So keeping the development period to a minimum can significantly increase profits over the life of the product. Professional development tools play a critical role here. For many markets, the requirements for functional safety are getting more strict. This increases development complexity considerably and requires additional time for testing and certification. And it's worth highlighting that not all lines of code have the same average cost. Taking the high-end cars as an example, much of the additional code going into cars these days is functionally safe code that needs to adhere to safety standards, following strict coding standards such as MISRA, and be subject to very high testing coverage. Usually, the system development lifecycle is represented by the V model. It describes the development steps from the early system design stage up until the final testing. The requirements on the left side should be verified on the right side to ensure that you build the right thing. However, validation should also happen directly on the left side while creating the requirement specification. This is what we call shift-left testing. This is important to prevent the system from harm due to late testing. This V-model approach is supported by various ARM products. For example, ARM processors include access protection via MPU or stack limit registers. During the software architecture design, functional models help to start creating and testing the design early. Static code analysis and MISRA coding rules help already during software development. Our tools integrate with lots of third-party tools to support that. Code coverage is a metric for test completeness, and we support this via trace and simulation models. Our debuggers show execution time and can gather execution statistics of your application. Fault injection is important to validate safety or security aspects of a system. Here again, models help you to avoid that you destroy any equipment and even allow for test automation. This also enables continuous integration of your software development. Today, very important for the agile development style, where you add additional requirements during the development. Overall, functionally correct models help you a lot to shift left your testing strategy and to enable clean CI flows. I will touch on that in more detail later. Before going into the details of testing, let's quickly touch on how to assess what kind of testing is actually required for your application. For that, the safety standards categorize safety requirements to the end system using so-called safety integrity levels, or SIL. The standards vary, but basically you are asked to analyze the risk of your system. Let me give you an example here. One of our customers builds window lifters for cars. One of the risks is that you can cut off or injure a finger with a window lifter. For example, when kids play in the back seat and their mother closes the window. While this might be categorized as likely, it does not really kill the kid. It's just severe. Looking at this table, the risk is categorized as 3. Modifications to the window glass may further reduce the risk so that you may be able to qualify it as unlikely. When you get in touch with functional safety for the first time, you might think that this is kind of voodoo, but it has a statistical background. Each of these levels, probability or severity, is roughly a factor of 10 apart. When done with the risk analysis of your system, it's easy to map the results to the SIL level of the related standard. And the SIL maps the acceptable risk effectively to the development process, which then impacts the design principles and test efforts. This is an excerpt of the IEC 61508 requirements to give you an impression. The full standard has several pages of them, and I won't bother you with all of them. Table A2 is about software design and development. Table B is about testing. Depending on the SIL level, you need to apply certain techniques. They might be recommended or highly recommended. When going through the qualification process with your certification body, it will be very tough to negotiate a highly recommended measurement away. This table shows that higher levels have higher requirements. In other cases, you must not use a certain technique, such as dynamic memory allocation, for example. Therefore, you should aim to reduce the SIL level for your development. For example, you can implement the safety critical part in a relatively simple system and isolate the complex part from being safety relevant. After this trip into the safety levels, let's talk about testing. This slide shows the type of testing that is done during the development process. As we saw in the V model, there are different levels of testing that the design has to go through. Unit testing is about checking the functionality of small parts of the code. When you integrate multiple components into a larger chunk of code, you do integration tests to see how they behave together. Functional tests show if everything is working as expected, while the final system tests check if the design is meeting all the requirements. Here, functional models can help you a lot up to the functional testing phase. If you create a virtual prototype, you can shift left your testing early in the design phase and use computing power to scale the tests to your needs, as all the instances are a repetition of the same underlying model. Only the final system test, which needs to be timing accurate, is required to run on the actual hardware to detect, for example, race conditions. Let's take a different viewing angle here. Which development platform should you choose? A native executable that runs on your host machine is quite inexpensive, but it lacks a couple of important items. Usually the tool chain is different and the results may not be accurate. A development board is based on hardware that has to be created in the first hand, so it does not really help you with shift left. Of course, it's accurate, and you can use the same tool chain. FPGA implementations have the same issues, only that they are also quite expensive, depending on the complexity of your system and thus the required FPGA. The final target is usually available quite late in the process, so this is not good for early testing. On the other hand, virtual models, in ARM we call them fast models or fixed virtual platforms, are software representations of a system and are thus inexpensive and scalable. They are functionally accurate, so registers, exception levels, translation tables, and the memory map are all available to programmers. They require the same tool chain and give you functionally accurate results. So the answer to this question actually depends on your stage of the software development. Virtual models are excellent choices for early software development and large volumes of regression tests. Hardware boards are ideal for system tests and final verification. In the traditional flow, you first developed your hardware and then started to work on the software that was tested on the hardware directly. As models are available, you can now start with your software development already in parallel to the hardware development. They enable you to run 1,000 tests in parallel, which gives you fast feedback to the programmer using CI tests. The good thing is that these tests are reproducible. Hardware can lead to different results due to timing issues. Also, test hardware is fragile. Connectors can have defects or loose solder joints. All these regressions are really hard to verify. Especially for unit tests, models are much better suited as you can map test input data more easily due to the unlimited amount of memory that is available on the host computer. Using models, you really get a great time to market gain. Today, the traditional methodology of embedded software development is challenged, and new techniques like continuous integration are playing a critical role in adapting to these new challenges. Before we go into more detail about continuous integration, let's look at some differences and challenges for embedded software development. An embedded project may consist of several devices, for example, a car, which contain a number of embedded systems with very different tasks and applications. Some may be running complex Linux-based distributions, while others will run RTOS or bare metal firmware with functional safety requirements. Most CI platforms and related tools available were developed for general purpose software development. They often need to be adapted or expanded to enable its usage on embedded applications. The embedded CI use case will bring a number of complexities, most of them related to how to perform automated testing on embedded hardware targets, and also how to integrate all of the different pieces together. Here are some of these points that bring extra complexity. It may be harder on embedded to create consistent environments. Some of the developers may need to work on multiple portions of the software. Each might have different toolchain configuration requirements. The company might need to invest on a board farm and maintain it, which can be very costly. Moreover, testing software on hardware targets is slower. Integrating all of the specific tools and processes for each of the subsystems into the CI flow can be complicated. Let's imagine one scenario where an embedded software company is working on their next product release. Their software has several components, each being developed by a small team of developers. For various reasons, including late hardware availability, the development schedule is not on track. Developers try to commit to the main software branch as often as possible, but due to time pressure, they only have time to implement new features. They do some unit testing individually, but they don't have time to work on merging to mainline as often. Some weeks before the release date, they go to feature freeze and start to integrate all the pieces together. There are differences on the local machines or branches, and several merge conflicts have to be debugged. But with so many bugs and conflicts, debugging is harder. Moreover, once the software was delivered, some bugs were reported by the customer. For their next project, they will need to change for a more efficient development flow, one that allows them to find and correct bugs much earlier, not in the field. They want to be confident with their code quality and would like to have a working deliverable image weeks before the delivery target date. CI is already being used by a number of companies for embedded applications, as it creates a more efficient process with higher speed, quality, and lower cost. One of the main principles of CI is that the developer needs to make small changes to their code and very often commit them, and those will be constantly tested and integrated. This increases their code quality by finding bugs earlier and thoroughly searching for bugs by running a variety of tests. The feedback of that is fast, ideally within minutes, and because only a small portion of the code was changed, the developer will be able to quickly fix bugs. Developers now spend less time debugging and running tests, so the delivery of software features will likely be faster. CI can reduce costs in the mid to long term. As for an example, I would like to ask you, what is the cost of finding a bug in production? Multiple companies have decided to implement CI for the safety certified software development flow. The use of CI greatly improves quality, and higher quality also means lower risk. Functional safety is all about reducing the risk of a fault happening. Also, functional safety requires gathering of testing evidence documentation, and since testing is automated with CI, this process gets simpler. Before we look at CI and how we could build an embedded CI flow, let's look at the main differences between CI and standard desktop development styles. In the standard desktop environment, each developer will normally take a copy of the source repo in the beginning of the day, will do some modifications, then commit their code to the main repo by the end of the day. At that time, the code that each developer has can be substantially different. The task to manually integrate the code from all developers gets complicated. With the CI flow, the developer will perform multiple code change commits to the server during the day, making only small increments. The server then will be responsible to build, integrate and test the code with a variety of tools, increasing the quality of the code and enabling that bugs are found earlier. This is where you are going to achieve all the benefits we discussed before, where the market is going. Let's now look at how a CI flow works. To start, let's look at it from a very high-level view. In the next slides, we will look into these steps in more detail to build up a more complete CI/CD flow. The very basic flow is the developer does small incremental changes to the code, he will commit it, and it will be automatically built and tested. Once the testing is done, it will be packaged and get ready to be deployed. If the deployment is on a production-like environment, it's called continuous delivery. If it's directly deployed to production, it's called continuous deployment. This is already implemented by many companies. For example, some of the social media and streaming services update their websites up to 40 times a day. In the embedded space, automotive companies already implemented CD for their vehicles with over-the-air updates. Cars are already today being updated every 4 to 6 weeks. But although that kind of continuous deployment may not seem so practical for deeply embedded applications for a number of reasons, the concept of continuous delivery can still be applied. If you really want to be certain that the application you are building is reliable, that you want to get it into a deployable state multiple times a day, but you may decide not to deploy it. The deployment of a new release is a business decision. Let's now look deeper on these steps. The build and test steps are now divided into several subtypes. The developer will do the incremental change on the code base or unit tests and will commit that change. The unit test the developer wrote will now automatically run on a functional model on the server. At this stage, a few additional tests could be run as well, such as code step checkers and static code analysis tools to find common bugs or vulnerabilities. If those fail, the developer would immediately be informed and he should start working on fixes ASAP. If successful, we would then go into integration, build and test. At this stage, all the single units would be linked together into a single library or application. For example, we may want to run a test that will check if the I2C driver and the sensor driver are working okay together. Then we go to the system build and tests. Here we want to test if all the system components are working together based on the specified feature requirements of the product. You remember the V model. Tests here can be very diverse. You could measure performance, code size, memory usage, critical latencies, and almost an infinite number of tests to find regressions in your code. On a recent paper on CD for automotive says that more than 20,000 integration and system tests are run before the production code is built. Now that every test passed, we can create a production build for user and field tests. At this stage, you will have the software running on top of the hardware. A question here: which of these tests take longer time to execute? The purpose of CI is for this feedback loop to be as quick as possible. Some people say initial test results feedback could not take more than 10 minutes. So the sooner the developer fixes the bug, the earlier and the less expensive it is to resolve it. Let's add another level of complexity here. Same flow as before, we added 2 branches. Having a test branch will first provide a separation between the branch that has all the test code and testing specific features. But will also guarantee buggy changes will not be committed to production until they went through all the tests and passed. As the output of the production build, we will have the application binary or artifact. On the deployment stage, we may want to deploy the changed artifact only to a small number of production field devices at first, and then deploy it to the entire base. This looks fairly complex, and it is, but a simpler CI flow could be built first, and then more stages can be added later. We now can expand even more our view, detailing some of the tools that could be used in such a CI flow. We have, for example, code repositories and version control systems like GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, and the likes, CI automation servers like Jenkins or CircleCI, compilers like GCC, free, or the ARM compiler 6. Then the virtual prototypes and containers, the ARM FVPs, fixed virtual platforms or fast models, or other virtual machines, test libraries like Google Test or Unity, debuggers, runtime systems, IDEs, and debug probes. We all offer these from ARM, from our functional safety runtime system up until Development Studio and U-Link and DStream debug adapters. If you want to learn more about our FUSA offering, we have a webinar on July 7th that will introduce you to the latest improvements that we have added to FUSA RTS. Just follow the link on the slide. With that, I will hand over to the Siemens team, to Zdenek, to let them talk you through the other important part of the V model, requirements management. Thanks.
Thank you, Christopher. Let me share my screen. And I will just continue where we left off. Welcome, my name is Zdenek Fiedler and I'm manager of the Polarion product management team at Siemens. And to continue in this story, let me start with where we left off. Reminder of these challenges of the modern software development. We talked about release frequency, trying to release more often, even with the over-the-air upgrades. We're getting into the situation where we might be seeing the overnight builds that are being released really daily. But that increased complexity and the frequency simply means that we have more artifacts we need to trace. And always there is the question, what actually is within that artifact? Does it mean that day to day, these teams have delivered some significant improvements, maybe fix the bugs or re-architect some of the features? Just looking on the binaries, it might be very hard to be able to explain what is in that binary. And if some of these tests are failing, what actually it means? Does it mean that newly implemented functionality is not working properly? Or does it mean that that functionality was not yet been developed and implemented? That complexity is also increasing the variability. We're trying not to redevelop the wheel. The idea is try to reuse the assets, trying to build the new combinations, work with these combinations and try to understand how they are impacting each other. Can they collaborate seamlessly? Can they be integrated? Or is there anything else as the integration layer that needs to be developed and integrated? With all of that, we're always shooting on improving the quality. The whole notion of the validation is really how to improve the quality in front of our customers, how to demonstrate that. But these challenges means that with more often releases, with the rising complexity, we are simply struggling to keep and improve the quality at the same time. Having more releases requires more work through validation, which requires more of the automation. And as I was describing, it's not just about trying to do more with the automation, trying to do the shift left, but also understanding what is actually happening and being able to interpret the results. That's exactly where the Siemens toolchain can help and provide that layer of the visibility and the information. Christopher was talking about the V model and the importance of the V model from the shift left paradigm. The left-hand side is the definition. The right-hand side is typically the validation, and we are trying to build these parallels and saying we're defining the requirements, we're diving down, and we are building more of that. And then, of course, we are constantly validating. But with the agile approach, it also means that there are the iterations happening within the V model. The V model is no longer just a waterfall. We are progressing to the next phase of the V model before finishing the previous one. We might try to do some of the exploits or spikes before even closing the previous iteration, because we need to be sure that we are on the right path. And of course, the fail fast paradigm is part of the agile. We're trying a different ways. And of course, if we are failing, we'll try the other one. SpaceX rockets firing and then just exploding. Well, it might look like a disaster, but in fact, it's the fail fast idea in the terms of the large scale SpaceX delivery time. And agility here is really part of the process. And having agility in terms of functional safety, it's quite challenging. Functional safety itself requires stability. It requires the ability to give the proof points, the traceability. And of course, any of the regulatory body would like to see what has been validated. Within the agile lifecycle, it might be hard to keep that trace because things are changing. We're jumping from one sprint to another one. Same feature might jump from one team to a different team. During the development, they might split it, they might put it together, they might have decided to even put it into a different build. So the initial requirement that was describing what has to be done could be implemented in various ways throughout the agile development cycle. And having the trace and being able to navigate to give you the scope, what actually you're looking at from the perspective of what that build contains, how that build should be tested, and if something goes wrong, what should be the root cause. That's the important part of the entire agile validation cycle and the recent V models. We're talking about so-called cyber-physical systems. It means that we are working with a software either running on the hardware or on a simulated hardware in typically MBSE setup, model-based system engineering. And Siemens toolchain, particularly Polarion here, can help you to keep your agile lifecycle under control. What I was describing on that agile V model, it means that a complexity here is really also coming from the agile processes. It's not just the complexity of the product itself. It's also the complexity which is coming from the process, increasing the variability, and of course, bringing more challenges how to validate these processes early on. We might not have the hardware. We would like to get the simulation. We would like to run the validation already on the models only, but still, we need to be able to secure the collaboration. More teams are working on that. They're no longer silos. We're not waiting for the other teams to finish their work. We need to collaborate seamlessly. We need to have the granular traceability. We need to know which line of the code is really in that build, which line of the code is delivering the functionality described within the requirement. And of course, if a self-driving car, for example, hit a pedestrian, then the regulatory body will ask, where is the line of the code that actually didn't stop the car? Who designed that functionality, who validated it, and where you have the original requirement saying that this should or should not happen. All of that is also coming with that reusability and the variability. Advanced reuse is here to help to leverage what has already been developed and try to plug it into the new systems. We're not building the new systems from scratch. We're trying to address. We're first working with the mental models. We're trying to build that model. We would like to start validating on the model through the simulation first before even touching the code itself and start doing this stuff here. So the validation for the advanced reuse is very important, which gives you the information, at least on the high level. Are we on the right path? Help you to fail fast and maybe rethink the overall architecture and the process if it's not the right path, which was confirmed by the validations. Functional safety is also about the real time and safety criticality. It's very nice to be able to build and design the system which behaves under the stable conditions. But once under the stress and performance test loads, they might provide a different behavior. So it's important to be able not just to assess the functional requirements, but also the non-functional, and be able to address these non-functional requirements throughout the validation process itself. I was talking already about the MBSE, model-based system engineering, what it actually means, and how this plugs into what we're describing. High-level idea of requirements that are defining what the product should do, that's well accepted. But then how these requirements are actually progressing and materialized in the source code, there are the multiple steps. And the sooner we will have the models which can help us to validate the idea through the simulation, that's the paradigm of the shift left. So before even building something in a silicon, we would like to be able to do it on a model, simulate how the behavior will look like, and also do the performance monitoring. Understand how the system will behave under the test, under the stress load, and define what are these non-functional requirements, what it actually means, and be able to judge if the failure of these tests is really impacting our overall product. We simply might get to the stress load at a level that we will never face in a real production usage. So is it a real problem that our product, simulated product, is failing to reach these boundaries? Maybe not, but to be able to qualify and judge, we need to have that initial information. We need to have the traceability and be able to answer the question, what I was testing, what were my boundary conditions, and how this is linked to the behavior and the requirements of the product. The worst thing in an automated CI/CD flow is that all the unit tests, all the nightly builds are all green. But in fact, they are not telling you the truth. They are not telling you the story how your product or how your simulated product actually behaves in context of the original requirements and expectations of your customers. So that's the importance of having the traceability and being able to define what has to be tested and how has to be tested, because that gives you the understanding and interpretation of the test result. That's where the Polarion plugs into the story. Polarion is here to help you to define, deliver, verify, and maintain software solutions, either interacting with the physical hardware or within the context of the MBSE, of the models and the simulations here. Polarion brings a couple of the other tool chains that can help you to leverage agile workflow, software development processes, and maintain them at scale with a full traceability. One of them is, for example, SAFE, Scale Agile Framework. Scale Agile is one of the partners that is building a process framework, how a large enterprises could be an agile, from a team level all the way to the large enterprise. This is natively supported by Polarion. Polarion is one of the official SAFE partners, and we're able to help and navigate throughout the agile processes within the V model, within a different other templated solutions that could be laid out on top of the Polarion, with all the features providing the granular traceability, navigation, and especially the historical traceability and auditability, which is necessary for the functional safety and any of the regulatory reporting. So how Polarion sits in the overall picture of the functional safety and the importance of the requirements management. There are a couple of the different compliance methodologies. ISO 26262 for automotive, FDA 21 CFR Part 11 for medical devices. All of these could be templated and laid over the Polarion. Polarion is process agnostic and could be configured to support these various processes, giving you the assets and the guidance how the process should look like and providing the full traceability and help you to manage the risks. With connection to the ARM toolchain, we can also automate what is happening in that CI/CD validation, be able to set the scope of the validation itself, and then load and store the results of the validation to be able to provide the full traceability and the auditability once it's needed in a context of functional safety and regulatory requirements. Polarion is really a lifecycle tool that goes all around the processes, giving you the linkage into that. It's not necessarily replacing the other tool chains. It can operate on top of the CI/CD pipeline, providing the traceability throughout that and linking all the pieces together to have the clue and navigatability throughout the process. They're no longer distorted or isolated tools that are just doing their job, executing a test, doing the simulation itself. But with Polarion, you will get a full navigation and understanding what is happening here and give you the ability to interpret the results of the validation in the right scope and context. So Polarion is here to help you to protect quality, bring the traceability, and address the complexity while shifting left in the paradigm of the functional safety. And with that said, over to you, Stuart.
Thank you, Zdeněk. So before Stuart jumps into his demo, we're just going to do a quick overview to set that up and to put the pieces together. So starting from the left side here, you'll see a switch, a microcontroller, and an LED. Stuart's going to show how these work virtually. There'll be a stimulus input into the switch, which will light up the LED indicator. And a unit test will run on the virtual MCU called a FAST model. And this type of FAST model is called a fixed virtual platform, shown here in the middle black box. The FAST model, as Christopher mentioned, is functionally accurate in that it has a complete programmer's view with visibility into the registers and to the status of those registers. And this allows it to be used for debug and to get into the MCU earlier in the design process. If we just move over to the Siemens Polarion block here towards the middle, Siemens ALM, or Application Life Management, as Zdeněk just mentioned, houses and links the elements of the software development lifecycle, everything from requirements to the code to the test result. It links it all together and provides the traceability needed for compliance, and this is also a recognized tool from TÜV. Polarion also comes with functional safety templates for compliance standards and additional templates like V-model templates. Underneath that, you'll see the ARM Development Studio. This is the compiler, performance analyzer, and the integrated development environment. That's where the code was compiled. But for today, we're going to show you fast models. And by the way, these are also safety qualified. They come with a safety qualified package recognized from TÜV. What we're showing today is this fast model over here where the code and the unit test will run. And that's the virtualized processor that Christopher was talking about. Stuart will pull a requirement and a test case from Polarion. He'll then run the software module with the unit test, inject a manual fault, and then the result will be stored back into Polarion to complete the loop. So Stuart, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Let me share my screen. And hopefully you can see that. I'm Stuart Turner, an FAE with Electrosource. And today I'd like to show you a demo of Siemens Polarion and ARM fast models used in a continuous integration implementation that enables automated unit testing. Now, this testing is going to involve software and hardware interaction, but instead of using actual hardware, I'm going to be using an ARM Cortex-A9 fast model, which is functionally equivalent to the hardware platform. This allows for earlier testing in the development cycle before hardware is ready or available. Your screen is showing you Polarion. It's a cloud-based ALM solution. I have a project called the Drive Pilot Project. It's a project to implement an autonomous vehicle drive control system. This project is based on the V model, and the pieces of the V are actually off to the side here. We see them. I'm going to look at some of the software requirements. I have a specification doc and scroll through here and go through all the systems and subsystems. Here's the part that talks about the ARM processor and its functionality with relays and LEDs. And I want to come down here to the native user console section. And I am concerned today, or going to talk today, about this one subsystem that is responsible for object detection around the vehicle. And let's take a closer look at this requirement. And there are 8 sensors around the vehicle, and there are 8 LEDs on the dash that correspond to each sensor to allow the driver to know that there's an object that's been detected, what its location and proximity is. Now, this is the requirement, and we can follow the linkage and traceability right up here. So I can see here, there's something linked, and this happens to be a task. This task actually implements the software control module for object detection and control of the LEDs. And this is linked to a unit test case. This specific test case simply just tests the relays or input sensors, sends a signal into the software control module for each sensor. And when that sensor, the input is triggered, the corresponding LED should light. And down here is a section to hold the results of the test case. Now, to develop the control module, I've utilized ARM's Development Studio, and my application will be running on top of ARM's RTX real-time operating system. And I will be using the Cortex-A9 fast model. Now, what's unique about this is, like I said, it's hardware equivalent, and there actually comes with an LCD with switches, and there's 8 LEDs here. I have these mapped to virtual GPIO pins, and we can actually look at the registers on the processor here. And here are a register for the switch and a register for the LED settings. So my unit tests involve hardware software interaction. So the software will inject, the test case will inject a sensor signal into the pin, into a pin, which will then correspondingly trigger a switch, which will then light an LED. Now I have a test framework, which I'll bring up. And this utilizes the continuous integration capabilities of Polarian and ARM fast models and their ability to communicate with other tools. So I'll utilize this test framework in order to execute tests and record the results, and while ARM and Polarian are communicating between each other. Normally, this whole process would be automated and tied to a build system like Jenkins and a source code repository. But for this demo, I've enabled some human interaction to better show you some unique capabilities. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the test framework, get that up. It's telling me to go ahead and start the fast model, which I'll do. And now that that's started, we'll bring this up and bring this up. So watch the switches and the LEDs. I'm going to go ahead and start the test, and the test framework will pull that unit test case from Polarian, and then it's going to go through each step. It sends in a sensor signal, which should trip the switch, and you'll see up here the switch goes up and the corresponding LED lights. Then the fast model outputs the LED register value, which should match the input sensor value. So then that value is passed to Polarian, which then determines whether the step passed or failed and the result of the entire test case. We've got one more sensor here to go. And now the test is done. So now we'll go back to Polarian, and I'll go ahead and refresh this. And if we come down to the test record section, now we can see there's a test record, and we can see each test step and the results. And since all of the steps pass, the test case has passed as well. Now let's do something a little more interesting. Since I can actually write to registers, I could do some fault injection or edge case testing. For example, I could write an erroneous value to a register. But for this demo, since I already have the register of the switch mapped to the switches themselves, I'm going to do this manually for the demo and inject the fault. So we'll go ahead and start testing, and I will manually flick a switch here and get it to fail. And we'll write here, and it'll tell us the test step 2 failed. So we'll go back to Polarian, refresh the view here, and go. And we can go to the test records, and we'll see there's a new test record here, and it failed. And it tells us test step 2 failed. And here is the failure, the reason for failure, and what happened. There is also a defect or bug that has been automatically generated, and we'll look at that. And that's telling me the test case ID and what happened with the failure and the failure conditions. And with Polarian integrated with email, this will automatically send an email to the software engineer responsible for the software control module, letting them know that there's a bug or an issue they need to look at and test for. So that is my ARM Polarian CI mashup. And now back to you, Peter.
Thank you, Stuart. So we'll just move into the summary here and then head into the Q&A portion. All right, so to summarize, shift left and trace, we covered how to shift your testing left on functionally accurate models and trace the result, as Stuart just showed. With respect to continuous integration and continuous delivery, we covered how to run a simple unit test, but you could also run more complex testing, such as a functional test, run that on a server, and also, as Stuart mentioned, implement and leverage other third-party plugins like Jenkins or Jira, which the tools plug into. Both Christopher and Zdenek talked about integrated model-based system engineering, how you can use these functional accurate processor models as a vehicle pre-hardware, but they could also be used for post-hardware testing too, or integration. And there's some information that we can send post-seminar to show you what that looks like. Zdeněk talked about application life management tools and how you can trace and manage the software development lifecycle for functional safety compliance. And as Stuart just showed, these are functional safety tools and that they're both safety qualified. There are more resources on this on the ARM developer site, along with the Polarion site. There's a couple of really good blogs written by both Christopher and Taha on functional safety and how you could do some of this testing. And we'll provide some of these presentations, both these presentations rather, and links to some of these resources. We invite you to try some of this out for yourself. There's available Git downloads to compare things like software versus hardware results. And of course, if you have any eval requests, we'll be happy to accommodate those as well. So Mike, are there any questions?
Yes, Peter, thanks. The first question, and this would be for Christopher. How can we do functional tests if we require specific industrial protocols, in brackets, i.e. PLCs, and brackets, in fast models?
I'm not absolutely familiar with those protocols, but yeah, the fast models usually are modeling the core. We have some extended models available that also have some peripherals. So depending on which peripheral you exactly need for that protocol, you can, of course, then also simulate them with a fast model.
Okay, and if we get any further answers, all these questions will be submitted to ARM and Siemens, and if they have any further answers, we'll get those out to you.
Yeah.
And this one, I think, is for Zdeněk. You mentioned templates. What type of templates does Polarion have?
There are multiple templates in Polarion depending on the functionality. So once we're talking about the functional safety, these are typically the templates supporting automotive, aerospace defense, or medical device development. So I was mentioning ISO 26262, FDA CFR Part 11, and there are also other templates typically provided by various partners that might be targeting some specific deployments or process needs. And if you would like to learn more directly on the Siemens Polarion page, we have a couple of the success stories and overview of the available templates. So there is something called extension portal on top of a Polarion with templates that are either provided as a part of the Polarion package or supplied by a third-party partners.
Thanks, Zdeněk. One point on that, when you get your, when all the attendees get their Zoom email with the link to the presentation files and the video, at that point, you'll also on the Siemens site, there'll be a Siemens logo. If you click on that, that will take you to the Polarion site in this in the landing page that we set up. Another question, I believe this one would be for Christopher. Do you have any examples of fast models and where can I find them?
Sorry, I muted myself. I have a thunderstorm here. I didn't want to interrupt with loud bangs. On developer.arm.com, you will find everything about fast models and fixed virtual platforms. We have, so in general, fast models and FVPs are available, yeah, for sale, but we also have a couple of free models available that you will find on developer.arm.com.
Thanks, Christopher. One other question here. Does the framework also support running tests on actual targets? I'm not sure if that's for Stuart or for Christopher.
Maybe for Stuart, I don't know. Sounds like Stuart.
Yes, well, it would be a Polarion would certainly integrates with test frameworks and supports running tests on external targets. It also has a capability of exporting in XUnit or other popular test case formats, which then you could import into your test framework and output the results from the test cases, and then you re-import those into Polarion, and the test records are created and the results are recorded. So there are many different ways to integrate Polarion with the test framework.
Thanks, Stuart. And one more additional follow-up on that. Do you have any examples of test frameworks that you've integrated with Polarion?
I can answer. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I can answer this one. Yes, Polarion offers the variety of the integrations. I would say the open interfaces and the openness of the Polarion is built in the way and the idea that it could be easily plugged into the CI/CD toolchain of practically any customer. So from the validation perspective, we are supporting multiple of the tools, including, for example, Simulink. And there are also some custom implementation available that are leveraging the standard Polarion interface. So there are a couple of the integrations provided out of box, and I would say multitude of the others built specifically for the given customer and even maybe their legacy or purposely built tools.
Thanks, Danik. And then can functional models be modified, or are they editable?
The fast models can be modified, and the fixed virtual platforms, as the name say, are fixed. I mean, you have a couple of parameters that you can change, but in general, they are not as flexible as the standard fast models.
Thanks, Christopher. And with that, that's the end of the questions. Peter, back to you.
Okay, so following this seminar, as I mentioned, you'll receive an email to the registrants. You'll receive an email with a link to download the files. That'll give us a couple of days to put that together. That'll take you to a landing site where you can download them so that we don't clog your inbox with large files. And additional links will be available there as well for ARM development, the ARM development site, along with the Polarion site. There's a bunch of manuals there. There's also blogs that talk to this subject. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us directly. Any eval requests, we'll be happy to address them. So with that, I think we are right on time, and thank you for joining today. We look forward to hearing from you in the future. This concludes the webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.